Well, earlier I spoke to NBN Co-Chief Executive Mike Quigley. Mike Quigley, welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Tikki.
Now, just picking up from Neil's report, Open Networks says it can make high-speed connections thousands of dollars per household cheaper, saving billions. Why wouldn't you go with them?
First of all, Tikki, let me say, NBN Co's obviously its aim is to build the NBN as cost-effectively and efficiently as possible. If there was a cheaper way to do it, we would be very interested. I'm not sure where they have got their numbers from. I suspect that the dollar number they got was picking up what is a liability for damage out of a development contract. The numbers they have are simply wrong.
So their estimates of NBN costs for greenfield sites of $3,000 a home is way over.
That is not our cost. That is what I understand is a liability clause in one of the contracts. It's nothing to do with cost.
Can you do it for under $1,000?
We are doing it for under $3,000.
Can you do it for under $1,000, which is what they say?
Our costs are more in that range.
So what do you say to those players who say they can do things as well and more cheaply, delivering 100 to 300 megabits? Why isn't that enough?
It is enough, and that's what we're delivering. The problem we have, Tikki, is often we find, especially with some small companies, they want to introduce themselves as middlemen in the middle of us and suppliers. We find that with satellite providers. Sometimes we find it also in these areas.
So Open Networks would be one of those?
They're a very small company, I think, if I understand it, based in Victoria. We have a responsibility to provide greenfields estate anywhere in the country. They can focus on the ones that are most profitable for them.
The difference between the views of NBN Co and government on the one hand and some private players on the other raises the question of why hasn't a proper cost-benefit analysis been done?
Well, a cost-benefit analysis is a different issue. That's about the benefits of the NBN, the network itself overall. What we're talking about here is construction costs. And I think we're in line with by far the majority of the construction industry. I think they all understand.
But when I say cost-benefit analysis, I mean delivering the right number of megabits for the cheapest cost in the fastest possible time frame.
I don't think there's any disagreement about that. We all understand what fibre to the premise networks can do, and we're delivering on those networks in the most efficient and cost-effective way we possibly can.
But again, why does it have to be to the home? I mean, Malcolm Turnbull is asking this. Why do you have to have the network going right to the home?
Because that is the architecture which will serve the nation for the next 20 years and longer.
But that's a given. That is your riding instruction, is it?
It is. That's what we have to do. That's what the government has asked us to do. And by the way, I think that's a sensible approach, given that most places in the world are moving to fibre to the premise.
What about satellites? Newsat is saying why not piggyback on an existing satellite rather than spend $660 million on your own 2 satellites?
The satellite that Newsat's talking about doesn't exist yet. It's a plan. They haven't got funding for the satellites yet. And by the way, the satellite is aimed to be in a slot that's at 91.5 degrees east, which is over the Bay of Bengal. There's an almost negligible proportion that's allocated to Australia. So it's just a nonsense to say we could use that satellite.
Now, last month you warned that a coalition government would not be able to find a buyer for the NBN if it stopped the project. But isn't that because you are doing the most expensive connections first? So if the coalition government got in and then started doing the least expensive connections first, wouldn't they then have an asset that was worth selling?
Well, I think because the government's trying to set out to provide broadband to all of everybody in Australia, all premises in Australia. No commercial entity would build a network such as this.
But it's being built to target the most costly areas first.
No, not exactly. It's being built, I'd say, almost uniformly across the nation. We're certainly not focused on the most profitable areas first, but neither are we focused on the least profitable. We're trying to broadband right across Australia and do it in the most equitable and reasonable way we can.
Now, you've updated your NBN plan. You're handing it over to the government next week. Will it be very different in terms of future returns compared with the 2010 plan?
I don't expect it to be, no. We're trying to obviously keep as close as we can to our original plan. That's our aim. Of course, there have been some policy changes. The government asked us to do some different things now, so we have to obviously cost those in.
Can I ask you about that article in the Financial Review today? Contractors, possibly both Silcar and Transfield, are abandoning this coming round of construction details in part because of bungled planning, delays in rollout, tying up workers and reducing profits.
I, in fact, saw that article. I picked up a media release just before I left the office to come here to the ABC, perhaps. if I could just read it, it's only 2 lines. It says, Silcar rejects the AFO article. This is from Peter Lamel, by the way, who's the CEO of Silcar. He said the report in the Financial Review that Silcar is set to abandon the NBN is manifestly untrue. Silcar has tendered for every component of the NBN and remains 100% committed to this nation-building project.
But if the thrust of that report, or part of that report, is correct, in that some contractors are looking more carefully at taking part in the next round, aren't you going to reduce the tension in your tender process? And that's going to push costs up. We
see no evidence of that at all. We expect to have the same competitive tension that we've had in the past. And I'd have to repeat again, even the CEO of one of those companies says the AFR report is wrong.
Mike Quigley, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Tikki.